How do you mitigate your risk? Montel's forecasting services cover risks from hours ahead to years ahead. We welcome you to hedge your market exposure with our diverse forecasting portfolio. Contact us at sales@montelnews.com for more info and a free trial.
Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. Today's pod focuses on one of Europe's largest energy markets, and while a last bastion for coal, it has also witnessed a rapid growth in solar power. There are ambitious plans for offshore wind and also for nuclear. But will Poland manage to wean itself off coal, given the ambitious net zero targets at the EU level, and how will it finance its green energy transition? Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to answer these questions is Pawel Czyzak, Head of Energy and Climate at Instrat, Warsaw-based think tank. So a warm welcome to you, Pawel. I hope I haven't totally mispronounced your name.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Hello.
I thought we could start, Pawel, by talking about the renewables in Poland. What's the current status of solar? There's been quite a boom, hasn't there, in recent months and years?
Yes. It's perhaps good we're starting from a positive note before going into the coal issues. Yes, solar has been growing fast. Last year we were actually the fourth biggest market in Europe at around 2.5 gigawatts added in 2020. I think this year will probably be more or less the same. Definitely around 2 gigawatts, and the outlook for the next 4 or 5 years is pretty steady. So the analysts are still forecasting around 2 gigawatt added per year, and placing Poland in the top 5 of European countries in terms of solar growth. So I think this is a pretty stable situation, fortunately, and perhaps in contrary to the other renewable technologies. But we are starting to see some problems, perhaps coming from the very rapid growth. One of these is the distribution networks, because we've had a lot of growth, especially in the prosumer market, so small PV installations in households, and these have actually caused a bit of a problem for distribution network operators, just because they feed in so much energy from the houses to the network in areas where the network isn't very robust, let's say. Well, it's just old and not really adapted to two-way sort of currents flowing. So there have been talks to somewhat limit this growth, at least in this area, in the prosumer market. And the support scheme is therefore changing to somehow accommodate that. So we will probably see a bit of a slower pace in the small PV sector, but we should see faster pace in the large PV solar farms. So perhaps now around 75% of the PV in Poland is small prosumers. We will probably see this switching. So big solar farms will probably take over at least 50% of this market in the coming years, just because the development pipeline is very strong, and also because of these changes in the support schemes.
That's very interesting. What's your view here, Pawel? Do you think more should be done on the DSO level to strengthen the grids rather than slowing down this massive prosumer surge?
Yes, that's definitely, well, that would be the preferred option, of course, because now I guess what the government is trying to do is to put a halt to the development of solar, and that's obviously not great for Poland, because the country is already behind in terms of renewable targets and in general developing renewables. So solar is really the only market that is growing, and stopping that is probably not going to make decision makers in Brussels happy. So I would say yes, definitely the better option would be to push some money towards the DSOs and strengthen the networks. The problem is, well, this is public money, so it's the solar growth is mostly stimulated by private money, and well, that's good, but nobody will invest in in distribution networks, really, no foreign investment, etc. So it's not easy to fund these investments in the networks.
Absolutely, but it'd be a shame if this boom at the household PV level would somehow came to a stop.
Yeah.
And how about the utility scale? Is who's building these kind of large scale solar plants? Is it the domestic utilities, or is it also seeing some foreign investment?
It is actually quite a lot of foreign investment, yes. So I would say it's a mix of both. The Polish utilities were a bit late to the party, I would say. So the first rounds of big solar auctions, I think they were mostly won from developers from Germany, from even from further Western Europe companies like, I don't know, Spanish, etc. Now we have actually just recently Lightsource BP announced 2 gigawatts of investment in Polish solar farms, so that's quite a huge pipeline. So it's quite a lot of foreign investment, and there's also big. For example, Columbus Energy is a big developer of. Well, they started as a developer of solar for households, and now they're also going into the big solar farm market pretty strongly, and they have a huge expertise and sort of Polish. They know the law very well and the whole situation, so they're very effective here. So yeah, I would say it's a mix of Polish and foreign developers, but mostly private money. I think the utilities, well, they're now starting to build bigger solar plants, but it's been a bit slow. They were a bit late to this whole investment process.
Do the bigger PV projects, is it easier to manage the grid stability there?
Well, it is. It's still a bit of an issue, but the really large solar farms, they can actually plug in straight into the TSO's network, well, the big substations, the high voltage substations. So it's less of an issue, I would say. Usually, when you have a 20, maybe 30 megawatt project, 50 megawatt, then you would usually just build probably a couple of kilometers of transmission lines, and then you can plug in straight into the high voltage substation. So that's, I guess, easier. If you have projects like maybe 1-2 megawatt, they would plug into the medium voltage substation, and then that could be potentially an issue. And I've heard investors saying that they have problems with getting the connection permits in some parts of the country, especially perhaps the northeast is not an easy place to invest in solar, even though there's quite a lot of free land, and the solar conditions are good, but the network conditions are terrible. So developing smaller projects there is not very easy.
And potentially very expensive as well.
Yes.
How about wind? I mean, Poland has some very ambitious plans for offshore wind. Could you talk us through some of those, Pawel?
Yes, I could. Yes, and offshore is definitely for some reason the government likes offshore, doesn't like onshore wind. The offshore pipeline is pretty strong. The idea was to build around 5, 6, maybe 7 gigawatts by 2030, which is pretty soon. And the projects, we already have a couple projects that are in progress, and they got the first round of financing. We have a sort of special support scheme for these first projects. So definitely the 6 gigawatts should be developed by 2030. They already have connection permits, all the paperwork pretty much done, and they seem to be on track in terms of the schedule, which is of course great. One issue is the installation port, because it's a couple hundred turbines that need to be, well, shipped out to the sea, and it's not so easy to do that in the port facilities we now have. So we're still waiting for some investments done on the ground in Poland, in Gdynia most probably, and these should allow for the installation of all these turbines. If this gets delayed, there's a risk we will have to ship these turbines from elsewhere, from Germany, for example. So that is one thing that might delay the progress. But well, I think I'm still pretty optimistic in terms of offshore, just because it is pushed strongly by the government, and a lot of state-owned companies are involved here. So, well, being honest, of course, their life is easier, and they have strong sort of lobbying power. They should be, it's in their interest to sort of get the government to buy in, and of course handle all the legal matters that are necessary. So I think this should be going well. And then in the sort of after early 2030s, we should see another round of projects. These will be supported by a sort of auction mechanism, and this is now being prepared, and already another round of projects is sort of forming. So this could add another 5, maybe even up to 10 gigawatts in the 30s and early 40s. So that is going well. There's a bit of a controversy because the government wants to sort of prioritize Polish companies, mainly Orlen, PGE. Well, this is definitely gonna cause some hiccups in Brussels, because it's not very compliant with the EU common market rules. So we'll see how that goes. But anyways, I think either way, there's a lot of foreign interest in investing in Polish offshore. So I think whether it's the state companies or the foreign companies, there's going to be a lot of people that want to invest in Polish offshore. So that's optimistic, I think.
Yeah, that's a positive there. I mean, Pavel, do you then view this growth in both in offshore wind, but also, if we're talking 2 gigawatts of solar a year, will this offset sort of the closure of of Poland's aging coal units?
Alone, probably not. At least not according to our forecasts. We haven't touched really on onshore wind, and that is a bit of a more difficult situation because the onshore wind investments have been blocked since 2016. There's a 10H rule in motion that sort of bans placing turbines around, let's say, 2 kilometers even from households. And Poland is very there's quite a lot of small villages everywhere, and there's houses everywhere. So it's not easy to find a spot where you can place a wind turbine now. And that means we haven't been seeing much growth in the onshore wind market, and we won't see it for at least a couple of years. And that will mean that there's not enough renewables to cover the demand, considering the closures of coal plants. So in our forecasts, we've written quite a few reports on this, and we've done a very comprehensive assessment of the renewable potentials, and these potentials are pretty high in terms of placement and the social acceptance and economic factors, all of that. So the potentials are there. It's I guess the legal situation that's a problem, and the development pace of these projects that is a problem. And that means that we still need some in 2030. We will definitely need a coal reserve. We will have probably some newer coal units still running. We need some of the older units to stay available. We probably need some gas peakers to handle the peak demand, and we need a lot of renewables. So if we keep the PV pace as it is now, and we build the offshore in time according to schedule, that will still not be enough. We need the onshore wind investments to cover the demand. Otherwise, we will be in trouble. So that is a missing link here.
How likely is a change in the onshore wind law? I mean, that seems to be, it has to come from government circles, but there seems to be some opposition to onshore wind in particular.
Yes, that is a weird, I would say, situation. Just recently, I heard that because the law is there, it's sort of it's not there. It's ready to be passed in Parliament. It's just, I guess, it doesn't have the political momentum it needs to go through the Parliament. But it's actually written, and we've seen it and commented on it, and it's ready. But sadly, I've just recently heard that the government is sort of standing down here. We're going into this anti-EU, anti-climate narrative, which means that there's really no political will at this point to pass the wind law, the updated wind law. So I wouldn't expect this happening this year. Let's hope for next year, especially since this bill was sort of linked to the EU funds, the recovery and resilience funding. So it should be passed, but of course the funding is stalled because, well, everybody's angry in Brussels at Poland. So there's a lot of difficult political, chaotic situations happening now, and it's really hard to forecast when this will change. But I definitely wouldn't expect it changing this year, which means the first projects, even if they pass the bill next year, the first projects will start coming in maybe 2023, and that is already a huge delay. It's like 7 years of no activity on the onshore wind market.
I'd just like to stay with this spat that Poland is currently having with the EU. I mean, you mentioned the implications for onshore wind. Are there other implications? I mean, are we talking even, something as dramatic as a Pole exit from the EU?
I definitely hope not. And I guess I don't want to go very deeply into the Polish politics because it's depressing and
Sure.
not very helpful, I guess. But it's definitely gonna have an impact on the energy transition, and I think we can see that already with the wind law we've just talked about. But also there's of course with the funding, because as I mentioned, the resilience fund, I think that was around maybe 15 billion euros. That's sort of stalled in Brussels because there's so much controversies around Polish rule of law and LGBT free zones, all of these ridiculous things the Polish government is doing. So the money, we don't have the money, which of course some of it was supposed to go to green projects, to renewable investments. So, and it's hard to imagine with this anti-EU narrative that the money will be available for Poland in the near future. So that's that. There's a couple of state aid situations now being negotiated with the European Commission. And these, I mean, state aid for coal mines, for coal power plants. And of course, the negotiations around these will be much more difficult with the current sort of political tension. So yes, I would say definitely, I wouldn't go into the Polexit discussion, and I definitely hope it's not going to happen. But even now, the I would say anti-EU narrative of the Polish government, we are already seeing some negative consequences for the energy transition, the climate transition, and of course the renewables markets.
The EU, the tap of the EU funds is being closed tight, or it's closing anyway in terms of the context of this disagreement or major spats. And this, of course, comes at a time when Poland faces a generation gap, a supply crunch after 25 due to EU rules on the emissions directive. The 50-50, the 550 rule. But what options are the table there? I mean, is gas coming back on the discussion? I even heard talk of nuclear.
Yes. Well, the problem with that is the timeline is very short. So the capacity market was introduced in 2018 were the first auctions, and then some of the newer power plants got contracts for up to 15 years, but most of the Polish coal plants could only be supported until 2025, as you mentioned. So the bottom line is that most of the coal plants are already running at negative operating margins, and they are kept alive by the capacity market payments. So they basically just get money for staying alive or being available to the market operator. And these plants are now, again, they get funding from the capacity market, but by 2025 they will stop getting this funding, and by that time they won't be able to cover their sort of fixed costs, and they will have even more negative operating margins than today. So all of this means that they will either shut down or they will have to be funded in some other ways. And since it's so soon, it's 4 years time, really, 5 years, it's really difficult because we're talking here like 7-8 gigawatts of coal plants at least. So we won't build 7-8 gigawatts of any thermal energy source within 5 years. We can maybe build, I don't know, 1-2 gas CCGT projects. 2 are in development. That's why I mentioned those, Ostrołęka and Dolna Odra. That's 2 gigawatts, right? So we have a huge hole in the electricity mix and the power balance in 2025. And of course, nuclear will not be the solution because, well, it's not going to happen in 5 years. It's probably not even going to happen in 10 years' time. So I would say we are not in a good position here, and that's why the government is planning to propose a new funding scheme for the coal plants. There's a restructuring plan that's being discussed, basically to offload the coal assets onto different state-owned agency that would sort of slowly shut them down, but that will require funding to run these power plants after 2025. So it's a difficult process and very complex proposal. So I won't get into the details, but basically we really need those onshore wind farms because these are the quickest to build. That's really the only thing that can supply power within 5 years' time. So that's why this onshore wind law is so important.
And it's the cheapest option as well, isn't it? But
of course, yes.
But just a final question for you, Pawel. Something that's come very clearly out of the current energy crisis we're seeing, not just in Europe but across the globe, is the scarcity of gas. I mean, how if Poland did decide to build 2 gas-fired plants to meet some of this shortfall, where would it source the gas from? There's certainly not an abundance of it about at the moment.
Yes, that's why I think we're seeing a bit of a different angle and a different direction of the gas discussion now. Poland used to be very pro-gas and wanted to build a huge pipeline. I think they're now sort of backing off in here because, of course, now I think 75-80% of the gas is imported, most of that from Russia, and we don't really want to be reliant on Russia, especially with the current situation. So I think actually the gas pipeline will be smaller and smaller. I would expect maybe the 2 CCGT projects happening, but we've already heard banks and the largest Polish banks saying that they don't really want to finance that because they don't see the gas plants being profitable. So I don't think Poland will stay on this pro-gas course as it planned. I think we're probably steering more towards the nuclear option. So yeah, I wouldn't say gas has a very positive outlook at this point.
And as you say, the nuclear option is also very long term. Who knows what will happen in 10, 15 years. Pawel, thank you very much indeed for joining the Montel Weekly podcast this week.
Thank you very much.
So listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or, let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.